There is a reason your thumb paused, a reason your mind hesitated, a reason something inside you whispered, "Wait, don't scroll past this." You may not understand it yet, but this moment, right here, right now, is not random. It is not coincidence. It is not just another video, another message, another passing sound in the noise of your day. No, this is a divine interruption. And if you feel even the slightest stirring in your spirit as you hear these words, then you already know something deeper is happening. You've been scrolling for a while, haven't you? Maybe looking for distraction. Maybe trying to escape the weight that's been sitting on your chest all day. Maybe searching for something you can't quite name. Clarity, peace, reassurance, something. And yet, nothing has really satisfied that inner restlessness. Nothing has quieted the questions running through your mind when everything goes silent. But then suddenly this appears. This message. This voice. This moment. And now you feel it. That subtle shift. That quiet pull. That unexplainable pause. This is not by accident. Because there are moments. Rare, sacred moments. When heaven reaches through the noise to get your attention. Not gently but urgently. Not casually but intentionally. And tonight is one of those moments. Tonight, something has aligned in the unseen realm just to bring you here. Just to stop you. Just to make you listen. You were not meant to keep scrolling. You were meant to hear this. Here is something you've been ignoring, something you've been sensing but brushing aside. That feeling that something isn't quite right. That sense that things are shifting around you in ways you can't fully explain. Conversations that feel off. Energy that feels different. Doors that open but don't lead anywhere. Thoughts that come out of nowhere and linger longer than they should. You've tried to rationalize it. You've told yourself it's just stress, just overthinking, just life. But what if it's not? What if that feeling, that quiet unease, that subtle awareness, is actually your spirit trying to wake you up? Because right now, as you're listening to this, something is happening beyond what your eyes can see. Something is moving in the spiritual realm concerning you. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Now. And Archangel Michael, the protector, the warrior, the one who stands between truth and deception, is stepping forward with urgency. Not to scare you, but to prepare you. Not to overwhelm you, but to awaken you. You've been too close to something to see it clearly. Too familiar with certain patterns to recognize their danger. Too trusting in spaces where discernment was required. And because of that, something has been forming quietly in the background of your life. Something subtle. Something calculated. Something you wouldn't notice unless you were paying attention. That's why this message had to reach you tonight. Because time is not as flexible as you think. And the window to become aware, to truly see, does not stay open forever. This is your moment. Not to panic but to pause. Not to react but to recognize. Not to fear but to focus. Because what you do after hearing this matters more than you realize. Archangel Michael does not interrupt without reason. He does not step forward without purpose. And if his presence is being felt in this moment, it means one thing. Something requires your attention immediately. So don't brush this off. Don't minimize this feeling. Don't tell yourself you'll come back to it later. Because later is exactly where missed moments live. And this is not a moment you can afford to miss. You are here for a reason. You are hearing this for a reason. And deep down you already know it. Now stay with me because what comes next will begin to reveal why. Type "I am ready" in the comments if you feel this message reaching your spirit. Lesson code 717 is now surrounding you. There is something you felt before you even understood why you stopped. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't shout your name or shake your world in an obvious way. It was subtle, almost easy to ignore. But it was there. That quiet nudge. That internal pause. That unspoken sense that something was pulling you, gently, but persistently, toward this exact moment. And even now, as you listen, you can still feel it lingering beneath the surface, like a whisper echoing in a place deeper than your thoughts. You've experienced this before, haven't you? Moments where something inside you says, "Pay attention," even when nothing around you seems urgent. Times when you felt drawn to something without logic, without explanation, without reason you could easily justify to anyone else. And maybe you dismissed it. Maybe you told yourself it was nothing. Just a feeling. Just a passing thought. But what if those moments weren't random at all? What if they were signals? Quiet, consistent attempts to guide you when your mind was too distracted to notice. Because the truth is, not everything that calls you is meant to be understood immediately. Some things are meant to be followed first and understood later. The pull you felt tonight is one of those things. You didn't arrive here by accident. You were led. And not in a way that forces you or controls you, but in a way that invites you. Gently, repeatedly, patiently, until you either respond or ignore it long enough that the moment passes. But tonight, you responded. Even if you don't fully realize it yet, you chose to pause when you could have kept going. You chose to listen when you could have scrolled. And that choice, small as it seems, is more significant than you think. Because something has been trying to reach you for a while now. Not just tonight. Not just in this moment. But over days, maybe even weeks. Through thoughts that didn't feel like your own. Through sudden realizations that came out of nowhere. Through emotions that didn't match your circumstances. Through patterns that kept repeating, even when you tried to move forward. You've been receiving signals, but they weren't always clear. They didn't come labeled. They didn't come with explanations. So you questioned them. You second-guessed yourself. You tried to rationalize what you felt instead of trusting it. And slowly, without realizing it, you started to doubt your own awareness. But that awareness, that sensitivity, that ability to feel something before you can explain it, that is not a flaw. It is not weakness. It is not overthinking. It is perception. It is discernment. It is something that has always been within you, even when you didn't have the language to define it. And right now, that same awareness is what brought you here. Not your curiosity. Not coincidence. Not habit. It was your spirit responding to a call. Because there are moments when the noise of everything around you becomes too loud for truth to break through in obvious ways. So it comes differently. It comes quietly. It comes as a feeling. A pull. A pause. A hesitation that interrupts your routine just long enough to redirect your attention. And if you listen closely, you'll realize that this isn't the first time you've been guided like this. But it might be the first time you're truly paying attention. And that changes everything. Because when you begin to recognize that these moments are not random, you start to see patterns. You start to realize that there has been a consistent attempt to guide you away from something or towards something even when you couldn't see it clearly. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Once you feel it, you can't pretend it's not there anymore. That's why this moment feels different. That's why this message feels heavier, more intentional, more direct. Because this isn't just about a feeling anymore. It's about understanding what that feeling was trying to tell you all along. You've been standing at the edge of awareness, sensing that something is shifting but not fully stepping into clarity yet. You've been close enough to feel it but not grounded enough to act on it. And now, the space between sensing and knowing is beginning to close. This is where confusion starts to turn into clarity. This is where doubt begins to lose its hold. This is where you stop questioning whether what you feel is real and start realizing that it always was. But here's the part you need to understand. Not everyone feels this. Not everyone notices it. Not everyone responds when the call comes. And that's exactly why this moment matters. Because you did. You felt it. You paused. You stayed. And now, you're about to understand why. Type "I trust what I feel" in the comments if this message resonates with you. Blessing code 909 is now activated around your spirit. There are messages that are general, and then there are messages that are precise. Messages that are not scattered across the masses, but directed with intention towards specific individuals at specific moments in time. And this is one of those messages. It may appear public. It may look like anyone can hear it. But the truth is, not everyone will receive it. Not everyone will feel it. Not everyone will stay long enough to understand it. Because this message was never meant for everyone. It was meant for you. Archangel Michael does not step forward for noise. He does not interrupt timelines casually. His presence is not drawn to curiosity. It is drawn to alignment. And if you are still here, still listening, still leaning into these words instead of moving on, then something about you has already aligned with what is being released right now. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to be called forward. Because that's what this is. A calling forward. Not a suggestion. Not a random encounter. But a moment where something higher is pulling you out of passive observation and into active awareness. And Michael's presence in this moment is not symbolic. It is purposeful. It carries weight. It carries urgency. It carries clarity that cuts through confusion whether you are ready for it or not. And here is what you must understand. Michael does not speak where he is not needed. He steps in when something requires protection. When something requires exposure. When something requires intervention before it progresses too far. And right now, his attention is directed toward you. Toward your life. Toward your current path and the things unfolding around you that you may not fully see yet. This is not random. This is targeted. Because there are layers to what has been happening around you, and not all of them exist on the surface. Some things have been developing quietly, subtly, without drawing attention. Situations, conversations, intentions, all moving beneath your awareness, shaping outcomes before you even realize what is happening. And while you've been navigating what you can see, something else has been forming just outside your focus. That is why this message is not casual. That is why it feels direct. Because it is. Michael is not here to comfort your assumptions. He is here to correct your perception. To shift your focus from what appears obvious to what is actually real. And sometimes those are not the same thing. You have trusted what you could see. You have relied on what made sense. You have given the benefit of the doubt in spaces where something felt slightly off but not strong enough to confront. And because of that, certain things have been allowed to continue without question. Not because you are unaware, but because you chose not to look deeper. But now, that option is being removed. Because what was subtle is becoming significant. What was small is becoming structured. And what was easy to ignore is becoming impossible to overlook. This is where Michael steps in. Not to create fear, but to bring awareness before something reaches a point where awareness becomes reaction instead of preparation. Because once something fully unfolds, your ability to influence it changes. Your position shifts from observer to responder. And right now, you are still in a position to see clearly before you have to act. That is the advantage being given to you. And not everyone receives that. There are people who will walk into situations blindly, only realizing what was happening after it has already impacted them. There are people who will ignore the signs until the outcome forces them to acknowledge what they refuse to see. But you are being given something different. You are being shown before it fully reveals itself. And that is not something to take lightly. Because with awareness comes responsibility. With clarity comes choice. And with this message comes a decision, whether you will remain passive or become intentional with what you now understand. Michael is not asking for perfection. He is asking for attention. He is asking you to stop moving automatically and start observing deliberately. To stop assuming and start discerning. To recognize that not everything around you is as it appears. And not every situation unfolding in your life is happening without deeper influence. Because there are moments when what you don't see matters more than what you do. And this is one of those moments. You have been called into awareness for a reason. You have been held here for a reason. And what you do next will determine whether this moment becomes something you remember or something that changes you. Type "I am aware" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 1212 is now active around your path. As this revelation settles into your spirit, understand this: every time a message like this reaches a soul at the right moment, it becomes a spark of light in someone else's darkness. When you choose to support this mission through Super Thanks with a PayPal link in the description, you are not just giving, you are sowing into a harvest of awakened hearts. The word says, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days," and right now, that promise is speaking directly to you. I feel led to say this plainly. I am stepping into this moment to help this message reach someone who is still lost in the noise. Your action is not small. It is prophetic. It is timely. It is obedience in motion. As you release your seed, may clarity multiply in your life. May protection surround your path, and may doors open that no confusion can close. Do not wait. Act now, and let your giving become someone else's breakthrough. There is something you need to understand right now, and it may shift the way you see everything that has been happening around you. The battle you are sensing did not begin today. It did not start when you noticed the tension. It did not start when things began to feel off. It was already in motion long before your awareness caught up to it. And that is why, for a while, nothing seemed clear. That is why things felt confusing instead of obvious. Because what was unfolding around you was not designed to be easily recognized. It was designed to blend in, to look normal, to feel explainable, to pass as coincidence. And for a time, it worked. You continued moving forward, responding to situations as they appeared on the surface, addressing what you could see, reacting to what you could understand. But underneath all of that, something else was active. Something more structured. Something more intentional. A quiet resistance that did not confront you directly, but positioned itself around you in ways that influenced your environment, your interactions, and even your thoughts. That is why certain things felt heavier than they should have. That is why small situations carried more weight than usual. That is why conversations left you thinking longer than necessary. It wasn't just the situation itself. It was what was surrounding it. Because not every battle announces itself with noise. Some battles move in silence. They position themselves in patterns, in timing, in subtle shifts that are easy to dismiss if you are not paying close attention. And the most effective ones are the ones that don't look like battles at all. They look like normal life. That is what makes them difficult to recognize. Because you are not looking for conflict. You are looking for clarity. And when clarity is clouded just enough, you begin to question your own perception instead of questioning what is actually happening. That is where this battle hath been operating. Not in obvious confrontation, but in quiet influence. You may have noticed how certain situations repeat themselves in slightly different forms. Different people, different conversations, but the same underlying tension. The same feeling that something is not aligning the way it should. The same sense that progress is being slowed, redirected, or interrupted at critical moments. That is not coincidence. That is pattern. And patterns do not form without structure. This is what Michael is bringing into your awareness now. Because once you recognize the pattern, you begin to understand that what you are dealing with is not isolated. It is connected. It has been developing over time, adjusting, adapting, finding ways to remain unnoticed while still affecting your direction. And the longer something operates without being recognized, the more influence it gains. That is why awareness now is critical. Because you are no longer at the beginning of this. You are in the middle of it. And the difference between staying in it and moving through it is whether you continue to treat each situation as separate, or begin to see them as part of something larger. You have been responding moment by moment. Now you are being called to observe pattern by pattern. Because once you see the pattern, your position changes. You are no longer reacting blindly. You are responding with understanding. And that shifts everything. It changes how you listen. It changes how you interpret. It changes how you move. Because you begin to realize that not everything requires a reaction. Some things require distance. Some things require silence. Some things require you to step back and watch instead of stepping in and engaging. This is where many people lose their advantage. They react too quickly. They engage too early. They respond before they fully understand what they are dealing with. And in doing so, they become part of the pattern instead of stepping outside of it. But you are being given a different position. You are being given the opportunity to see before you act, to recognize before you respond, to understand before you involve yourself. And that is not a small shift. That is protection. Because once you are aware of the battle, you are no longer vulnerable in the same way. You are no longer moving without direction. You are no longer guessing. You are choosing. And that is where control returns to you. Not control over everything around you, but control over how you move within it. Control over what you allow. Control over what you engage. Control over what you walk away from without needing to explain why. Because not every battle is meant to be fought directly. Some are meant to be observed until the right moment. Some are meant to be avoided entirely. And some are meant to reveal themselves fully before you make any move at all. This is what makes this moment important. You are no longer unaware. You are no longer moving without insight. You are now in a position where you can see what is forming, even if it has not fully revealed itself yet. And that means one thing. You are no longer surrounded without understanding. You are surrounded, but you are aware. And awareness changes the outcome. Type ISE the pattern in the comments if you understand this message. Blessing code 3434 is now active around your awareness. There is a reason your emotions have not felt consistent lately. A reason your energy has shifted without clear explanation. A reason your thoughts have been louder at certain moments and quieter at others. Almost as if something is adjusting the volume of your awareness without your permission. And for a while, you tried to explain it in ways that made sense. You told yourself it was stress. You told yourself it was timing. You told yourself it was just a phase that would pass if you ignored it long enough. But what you've been feeling is not random. It has never been random. Because randomness does not create patterns. Randomness does not repeat itself with subtle variations. Randomness does not align with specific moments, specific people, specific conversations that leave the same imprint on your mind over and over again. What you have been experiencing carries structure. It carries intention. And whether you realized it or not, your awareness has been trying to bring that to your attention. A heaviness you felt at certain times of the day, it wasn't just fatigue. That sudden shift in mood when nothing externally changed, that wasn't just emotion. That quiet discomfort in spaces that used to feel normal, it wasn't just overthinking. It was perception. It was your ability to sense when something was not aligned, even when everything on the surface looked acceptable. And because it didn't come with clear evidence, because it didn't come with obvious proof, you questioned it. You tried to override it with logic. You tried to convince yourself that what you felt did not match reality, so it must not be real. But now you are beginning to understand something important. Reality is not always defined by what you can see. Sometimes it is defined by what you can feel before it becomes visible. That is what has been happening to you. You have been feeling things before they fully form. You have been sensing shifts before they become obvious. You have been picking up on inconsistencies before they reveal themselves clearly. And instead of trusting that, you hesitated. Not because you are incapable of understanding, but because you have been conditioned to rely on what is visible instead of what is intuitive. But intuition does not require proof to exist. It only requires attention. And right now, your attention is finally aligning with what you have been feeling all along. Think about the moments that stood out to you recently. The ones you couldn't fully explain but couldn't completely ignore either. A conversation that felt slightly off, even if the words were normal. A reaction from someone that didn't match the situation. A delay that didn't make sense. A sudden change in behavior that you noticed but didn't confront. These moments were not isolated. They were signals. Small, precise indicators that something beneath the surface was not aligned the way it should be. And instead of coming all at once, they came gradually. Enough to be noticed, but not enough to force immediate action. Enough to create awareness, but not enough to remove doubt completely. That is how subtle influence works. It does not overwhelm you immediately. It introduces itself slowly. And if you ignore it long enough, it becomes familiar. That is the point where most people lose clarity. Because when something feels familiar, it no longer feels questionable. It becomes accepted, even when it should not be. But you did not fully accept it. Something in you resisted. Something in you kept noticing. Something in you kept returning to those moments, replaying them, trying to understand why they felt the way they did. That was not overthinking. That was awareness trying to break through. And now it is breaking through. Because you are no longer dismissing it the same way. You are no longer explaining it away as easily. You are starting to recognize that what you feel carries information. That it is not just emotional, it is observational. It is your mind and your awareness working together to process things that are not immediately visible. And that changes how you interpret everything. Because now, instead of asking, why do I feel this way? You begin to ask, what is this feeling showing me? That is the shift. That is where confusion begins to turn into clarity. Because feelings without understanding create doubt. But feelings with awareness create direction. And right now, direction is what you are being given. You are being shown that the discomfort you felt was not misplaced, that the tension you noticed was not imagined, that the shifts you experienced were not accidental. They were indicators. And now, you are in a position to interpret them correctly. Not emotionally, but intentionally. Not reactively, but observantly. This is where your awareness becomes useful. Because once you stop dismissing what you feel, you start using it. You start recognizing patterns faster. You start identifying inconsistencies earlier. You start moving differently, not because you are afraid, but because you are informed. And being informed changes your position. It places you one step ahead of what is unfolding. Not in control of everything, but aware enough to navigate it without being caught off guard. That is what this moment is giving you. Clarity over confusion. Understanding over doubt. Awareness over assumption. And now that you see it this way, one thing becomes clear. What you've been feeling was never random. It was preparation. Type "I trust my awareness" in the comments if this message resonates with you. Blessing code 5656 is now activated around your clarity. There is something forming, and the reason it has not fully revealed itself yet is because it was never meant to arrive loudly. It was never meant to announce its presence or give you a clear signal of its intentions. It has been moving quietly, positioning itself in the background of your life, aligning moments, aligning conversations, aligning circumstances in a way that feels natural on the surface but carries a deeper structure underneath. And that is what makes it dangerous, not because it is overwhelming, but because it is subtle. You have already felt traces of it without realizing what it was. That slight hesitation before responding to someone. That moment where something didn't sit right, but you couldn't explain why. That pause in your mind where you question whether something was genuine or slightly off. Those were not random thoughts. They were early warnings. Because hidden threats do not begin as obvious problems. They begin as small inconsistencies. Small enough to dismiss but consistent enough to repeat. And over time, those small inconsistencies start to form a pattern. A pattern that only becomes visible when you stop looking at individual moments and start connecting them together. That is what you are being called to do now. To connect what you have been experiencing. To stop viewing each situation as separate and begin recognizing that something hath been developing across multiple areas at the same time. Because this is not confined to one moment or one interaction. It is layered. It moves through people, through timing, through opportunities that almost align but never fully do. And if you are not paying attention, it feels like normal life simply not going the way you expected. But it is more structured than that. There is intention behind it. Not in a dramatic or obvious way, but in a calculated way that relies on you not noticing it until it reaches a point where it is already influencing your decisions. That is how subtle interference works. It does not force outcomes. It influences direction. It nudges things slightly off course, just enough that over time, the distance between where you are and where you were supposed to be begins to widen. And because it happens gradually, you don't immediately recognize the shift. You adapt to it. You adjust your expectations. You tell yourself that this is just how things are unfolding. But now, that perspective is changing. Because you are beginning to see that what seemed like natural delay may have been intentional misalignment. That what felt like coincidence may have been carefully timed interference. And that what you dismissed as minor may have been the beginning of something more significant. This is why awareness now is critical. Because the threat itself is not powerful on its own. It gains power through time, through repetition, through your willingness to ignore what feels slightly off in favor of maintaining comfort or avoiding confrontation. But the moment you recognize it, the moment you stop overlooking it, its influence begins to weaken. because it can no longer operate unnoticed. That is what is happening right now. You are moving from unawareness into recognition, and recognition disrupts patterns. It breaks the flow of subtle influence. It forces what was hidden to either reveal itself or lose its ability to continue in the same way. But here is the part you must be careful with. Not everything needs to be confronted immediately. Not everything requires a direct response, because reacting too quickly without full understanding can pull you deeper into the very pattern you are trying to step out of. This is where patience becomes important. Not passive waiting, but intentional observation. Watching how things unfold without rushing to conclusions. Noticing how people behave over time, not just in isolated moments. Allowing patterns to reveal themselves completely before you decide how to respond. Because once something reveals itself fully, your position becomes stronger. You are no longer guessing. You are no longer assuming. You are responding from clarity. And clarity removes uncertainty. This is what gives you control over your next move. Because once you see the structure, you can step outside of it. Once you recognize the pattern, you can refuse to participate in it. And once you understand the timing, you can avoid being pulled into situations that are designed to misdirect you. That is the shift that is happening now. You are no longer moving blindly. You are no longer accepting everything at face value. You are beginning to question what deserves your attention and what does not. And that is where protection begins. Not in avoiding everything, but in choosing carefully what you engage with. Because not every opportunity is meant for you. Not every conversation requires your response. Not every situation deserves your energy. And once you understand that, the hidden threat loses its ability to influence you in the same way, because it relies on your automatic participation. And you are no longer automatic. You are aware. You are observing. You are choosing. And that changes the outcome. Type "I move" with clarity in the comments if you understand this message. Blessing code 7878 is now activated around your path. There is a reason your attention has been pulled in so many different directions lately. A reason it has become harder to stay focused, harder to sit in stillness, harder to remain present without reaching for something to fill the silence. And on the surface, it seems harmless. It feels like habit, like routine, like something everyone experiences in a world that never slows down. But what you must understand is this distraction is not always accidental. Sometimes, it is strategic. Because distraction does not need to stop you completely. It only needs to delay you. It only needs to redirect your focus just enough that you miss what matters in the moment it is meant to be seen. And the more consistent the distraction becomes, the easier it is for something important to pass by unnoticed. Not because it wasn't there, but because your attention was somewhere else when it appeared. Think about how often your focus has shifted recently. How quickly your mind moves from one thought to another. How easily your attention is pulled away from something the moment it requires deeper awareness. It doesn't take much. A notification. A conversation. A random thought. Something small. Something quick. Something just enough to interrupt your train of thought before it fully formed. And once that interruption happens, the moment is gone. The clarity that was about to surface fades. The realization that was beginning to take shape disappears. And you move on without even realizing what you just missed. That is how distraction works. It doesn't feel like loss. It feels like movement. It feels like you are doing something, engaging with something, staying occupied. But in reality, it is keeping you from settling into the very awareness that would allow you to see clearly. And right now, clarity is exactly what you need. Because there are things unfolding that require your full attention. Not partial attention. Not divided attention. Full attention. And the more your focus is fragmented, the harder it becomes to recognize what is actually important. Everything starts to feel equal. Everything starts to feel like it deserves your time. And when that happens, you lose the ability to prioritize what truly matters. That is the danger, because not everything that captures your attention deserves your energy. Not everything that appears urgent is actually important, and not everything that feels engaging is beneficial. But distraction blurs those distinctions. It makes everything feel immediate. It makes everything feel necessary. And in doing so, it keeps you in a constant state of reaction instead of intentional action. You move from one thing to another without stopping long enough to observe what is happening beneath the surface. You respond without reflecting. You engage without questioning. And over time, that becomes your normal state. Constant movement. Constant input. Constant noise. And in that state, awareness weakens. Not because you are incapable of being aware, but because you are not giving yourself the space to process what you are experiencing. Awareness requires stillness. It requires moments where your mind is not being pulled in multiple directions at once. It requires you to sit with what you feel long enough to understand it. But distraction removes that space. It fills every gap. It occupies every pause. And without pause, there is no reflection. Without reflection, there is no clarity. And without clarity, you remain in the same cycle. This is why distraction is not harmless right now. Because at this moment, more than any other, you are being called to see clearly, to recognize patterns, to understand what is unfolding around you. And that requires focus. It requires you to be present in your own awareness instead of constantly shifting your attention outward. Because the answers you are looking for are not hidden somewhere far away. They are already within your reach. But you cannot see them if your attention is always elsewhere. This is where choice becomes important. Not a large, overwhelming decision, but small, intentional shifts in how you direct your attention. Choosing to pause instead of immediately reacting. Choosing to observe instead of engaging in everything. Choosing to sit with a thought instead of replacing it with another. These small changes create space. And in that space, clarity begins to form. You begin to notice things you would have otherwise missed. You begin to understand what you previously dismissed. You begin to connect patterns that once felt separate. And suddenly, what was unclear starts to make sense. That is what distraction has been preventing. Not your progress, but your perception. Because once your perception sharpens, your direction changes naturally. You don't need to force anything. You don't need to search for answers. You simply begin to see them. And once you see clearly, you cannot be misled in the same way. That is why this moment matters. Because you are being given the opportunity to step out of distraction and into awareness. To move from constant reaction into intentional observation. To reclaim your focus before something important passes unnoticed. And that is not something to delay. Because distraction will always be available. But clarity requires you to choose it. Type "I choose clarity" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 9090 is now activated around your focus. There is something you have carried for a long time without fully understanding it. Something that has shaped the way you think, the way you respond, the way you see situations before others do. It has made you feel different at times, out of place in certain environments, more aware than the people around you, yet unsure how to explain what you were noticing. And because you couldn't always put it into words, you learned to stay quiet. You learned to observe instead of speak. You learned to adjust instead of question. But what you thought with confusion was actually calling. Because not everyone is meant to move through life without awareness. Not everyone is meant to follow patterns without questioning them. Some people are placed in positions where they are meant to notice what others overlook, to feel what others ignore, to recognize what others accept without hesitation. And that position is not random. It is not accidental. It is intentional. You have been placed in that position, not to carry confusion but to bring clarity, not to follow pattern but to break them, not to blend into environments but to shift them. And that is why things have felt different for you. Because when someone carries awareness, they cannot move the same way as those who do not. They cannot ignore what they see. They cannot unfeel what they sense. They cannot pretend that everything is aligned when something clearly is not. And that creates tension. Not because something is wrong with you, but because something within you is working exactly as it was meant to. You were not meant to move through life unconsciously. You were meant to be aware. And awareness carries responsibility. Because once you see clearly, you cannot return to not seeing. Once you understand patterns, you cannot pretend they are not there. Once you recognize misalignment, you cannot comfortably participate in it. That is where your assignment begins. Not in changing everything around you, but in choosing differently within it. Choosing not to engage in what you now understand. Choosing not to repeat what you now recognize. Choosing not to ignore what you now clearly see. These choices may seem small, but they carry weight. Because every time you choose awareness over habit, you shift the pattern. Every time you choose clarity over comfort, you change direction. Every time you choose intention over automatic response, you create a different outcome. And over time, those choices reshape everything. This is what makes your role important. Not because you are meant to control everything, but because you are meant to influence direction, to interrupt cycles that would otherwise continue, to recognize what needs to change before it becomes permanent, to move differently so that outcomes begin to change around you. And that is not something everyone is given. Many people move through life repeating patterns without ever questioning them, responding in the same ways, making the same choices, experiencing the same outcomes. Not because they want to, but because they are not aware enough to see the pattern. But you are. And that is what sets you apart. Not in a way that isolates you, but in a way that positions you. Because being aware means you have the ability to step outside of cycles that others remain within. It means you can make decisions that shift outcomes instead of repeating them. It means you can recognize what needs to change before it becomes more difficult to correct. That is your assignment. Not to carry everything. Not to fix everything. But to see clearly and act intentionally. To recognize where your energy is best placed. To understand where your involvement creates change and where it simply feeds patterns that need to end. Because not every situation requires your presence. Not every conversation requires your input. Not every pattern requires your participation. And knowing the difference is what allows you to move effectively. This is where many people struggle. They try to do too much. They engage in everything. They respond to every situation as if it requires their involvement. And in doing so, they exhaust themselves without creating meaningful change. But your assignment is not about doing more. It is about doing what matters. It is about directing your awareness with purpose. It is about choosing where to act and where to step back. Because sometimes, stepping back is what allows patterns to reveal themselves fully. And once they are fully revealed, your actions become more effective. more precise, more impactful. That is the level you are being called to operate at. Not reaction but attention. Not assumption but understanding. Not repetition but transformation. And now that you recognize this, one thing becomes clear. You are not here to move randomly. You are here to move with purpose. Type "I accept my assignment" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 2222 is now activated around your path. As you step into this awareness, understand that every act of alignment you make becomes a seed planted into someone else's breakthrough. When you choose to support this mission through Super Thanks or the PayPal link in the description, you are not simply giving. You are sowing into a field where clarity reaches those still lost in confusion. The word speaks, one sows, another reaps, and in this moment, you are part of that divine exchange. I feel this clearly. I am choosing to become a vessel that helps this message reach the one who needs it next. Your support is not ordinary. It is a prophetic act of obedience that multiplies beyond what you can see. As you release your seed, may your path become clearer, may your decisions become sharper, and may your purpose unfold without resistance. Act now, because obedience in the moment creates impact beyond the moment. There are moments in life that feel ordinary while they are happening, but later you realize they were turning points. Not because they were loud or dramatic, but because they quietly shifted everything that came after. And what you are standing in right now is one of those moments. It may not look like it yet. It may not feel fully defined. But something is approaching a point of change, and the decisions you make from here will determine how that change unfolds for you. Because not every turning point announces itself. Some arrive quietly. They appear as simple choices, as small decisions, as subtle shifts in how you respond, what you accept, what you walk away from. And in the moment, they don't feel significant enough to define your path. What they do, because direction is not shaped by one large decision. It is shaped by consistent smaller ones that align over time. And right now, you are entering a sequence of moments where those decisions begin to matter more than before. You may have already felt this building, a sense that something is about to shift, that things cannot continue exactly as they have been, that certain patterns are reaching a point where they either change or they repeat in a way that becomes harder to break later. That feeling is not uncertainty. It is awareness of transition. Because when a shift is approaching, there is always a period where things feel unsettled. Not because everything is falling apart, but because everything is adjusting. Old patterns begin to weaken. New directions begin to form. And in between those two, there is a moment where clarity is available, but only if you are paying attention. This is that moment. And what makes it important is not just what is changing around you, but how you choose to move within it. Because change does not automatically create better outcomes. It creates different outcomes. And the difference between those outcomes depends on your awareness in the moment they are formed. If you move unconsciously, you repeat what is familiar. If you move intentionally, you create something new. That is the decision in front of you. Not a single decision, but a series of them. How you respond to what you now recognize. How you adjust your behavior based on what you understand. How you choose to engage or disengage from what no longer aligns. These are the moments that define the shift. And they will not all be obvious. Some will look like small opportunities to speak differently, to respond differently, to step back instead of stepping in, to observe instead of reacting, to trust your awareness instead of overriding it. And in each of those moments, you are either reinforcing the pattern or breaking it. That is how change happens. Not all at once, but through consistent alignment with what you now see clearly. Because now that you are aware, you cannot return to automatic responses without feeling the difference. You will notice when something is not aligned. You will feel when a choice does not match what you understand. And that awareness will guide you, if you allow it. But it requires something from you. It requires you to trust that awareness enough to act on it. Even when it is not the easiest choice. Even when it requires stepping away from what is familiar. Even when it means choosing clarity over comfort. Because comfort will always try to pull you back into what you already know. But growth requires you to move into what you understand. And right now, you understand more than you did before. You see patterns you did not fully recognize. You feel shifts you previously ignored. You are aware in a way that changes how you move. And that awareness is what prepares you for what is coming next. Because what is coming is not random. It is connected to the decisions you are about to make. The responses you are about to choose. The direction you are about to follow. And while you may not see the full outcome yet, you are already influencing it. With every moment you choose awareness. With every decision you make intentionally. With every time you pause instead of reacting automatically. That is how you move into a different result. That is how the shift becomes real. Not as something that happens to you, but as something you actively step into. And once you step into it, everything begins to align differently. Not instantly, but consistently. Because once direction changes, outcomes follow. That is what makes this moment important. You are not waiting for change. You are standing at the point where it begins. And what you do next will shape everything that follows. Type "I step into the shift" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 5151 is now activated around your path. There is something within you that you have only been using partially. Not because you lack the ability, but because you have not fully trusted it yet. You have sensed it at times, in moments when your awareness was sharper than usual, when your decisions felt guided instead of forced, when you knew what to do without needing external confirmation. But those moments came and went, and instead of building on them, you returned to what felt familiar. You returned to logic over instinct, to comfort over clarity, to habit over awareness. And in doing so, you kept your own power at a distance. But that power has never left you. It hath been waiting for you to recognize it, not as something rare or occasional, but as something consistent, something you can rely on, something that is meant to guide how you move, how you decide, how you respond to everything unfolding around you. Because what you carry is not just awareness, it is direction. It is the ability to see what others miss and to act on it before it becomes obvious. And that ability changes everything. Because most people wait for clarity to become visible before they act. They wait for confirmation. They wait for certainty. They wait for something external to tell them what they already sense internally. But by the time clarity becomes obvious, the moment to act has often already passed. The opportunity has shifted. The situation has progressed beyond the point where early action would have made a difference. That is why your awareness matters. Because it allows you to move before things fully reveal themselves. It allows you to adjust direction while others are still trying to understand what is happening. It allows you to remain steady in situations that confuse others, because you are not relying solely on what you see. You are responding to what you understand. But here is where you have held yourself back. You have questioned that understanding. You have second-guessed your perception. You have waited for confirmation instead of trusting the clarity that was already forming within you. And in doing so, you have delayed your own response. Not completely, but enough to keep you slightly behind the moment instead of aligned with it. That is what changes now, because you are no longer in a place where you can ignore what you know. You are no longer in a position where you can pretend uncertainty when clarity is already present. You have reached a point where your awareness is strong enough that it requires action. Not dramatic action, not reactive action, but intentional, confident movement based on what you already understand. This is where your power becomes active, not in controlling everything around you, but in controlling how you move within it, in choosing when to engage and when to step back, in recognizing when something aligns and when it does not, in trusting your ability to read situations without needing constant validation from outside sources, because external validation will always come after the fact. It confirms what has already happened, but your awareness gives you something different. It gives you the ability to act before confirmation is necessary, and that is where your advantage lies. But an advantage only matters if it is used. And up until now, you have used it cautiously. You have allowed doubt to slow it down. You have allowed comfort to override it. You have allowed habit to take precedence over awareness. And that is why you have felt that tension, that internal pull between what you know and what you choose. Because every time you ignore what you sense, you create distance between yourself and your own clarity. But every time you trust it, the distance closes. Your decisions become easier. Your direction becomes clearer. Your movement becomes more aligned with what is actually happening, not just what appears to be happening. That is the shift you are stepping into. From hesitation to confidence. From questioning to trusting. From reacting to choosing. And as you begin to move this way consistently, something changes. Not just in how you feel, but in what you experience. Situations that once confused you begin to make sense more quickly. Patterns that once took time to recognize become obvious earlier. Decisions that once felt difficult become straightforward. Because you are no longer disconnected from your own awareness. You are working with it. And when you work with it, your position changes. You are no longer trying to figure everything out after it happens. You are navigating it as it unfolds. That is where your power is. Not in knowing everything, but in knowing enough, early enough, to move differently. And now that you recognize it, you have a choice. To continue using it partially or to fully step into it. Because once you do, you will not move the same way again. Type "I trust my power" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 8080 is now activated around your decisions. There comes a point where awareness is no longer enough on its own. A point where seeing clearly is not the final step, but the beginning of a decision. And that is where you are now. You are no longer in a place of confusion. You are no longer guessing what you feel. You are no longer unaware of the patterns, the shifts, the signals that have been surrounding you. You have seen enough. You have felt enough. You have understood enough. And now choice is required. Tomorrow. Not eventually. Tonight. Because the longer you delay a decision that has already become clear, the more you begin to drift back into old patterns. Not because you want to, but because inaction creates space for repetition. And repetition does not need permission. It simply continues if nothing interrupts it. That is why this moment matters. Because you are standing at the edge between continuing what hath been and stepping into something different. And that difference will not happen automatically. It will happen because you choose it. You may feel the weight of it right now. Not as pressure, but as awareness that something within you is no longer willing to move the same way. That something has shifted internally. And even if nothing external has fully changed yet, you already know that you cannot go back to responding the way you used to. You cannot ignore what you now recognize, You cannot pretend not to see what has already become clear. That is the moment of decision. And it is not about one large, dramatic action. It is about a series of intentional choices that begin right now. Choosing to trust what you feel instead of dismissing it. Choosing to step back from what no longer aligns instead of forcing yourself to stay. Choosing to remain silent in moments where reaction would pull you back into patterns you are trying to leave. Choosing to observe instead of immediately engaging. These choices may seem small, but they are not. Because every one of them reinforces a direction. Every one of them either strengthens your awareness or weakens it. Every one of them either moves you forward or keeps you where you have been. And that is why this decision cannot be postponed. Because postponing it is still a decision. It is a decision to remain in what is familiar instead of stepping into what is clear. It is a decision to delay alignment instead of acting on it. And while that may feel easier in the moment, it comes with a cost. The cost of clarity fading. The cost of awareness becoming quieter. The cost of returning to automatic responses instead of intentional ones. But you are not meant to move backward. You are not meant to return to a state where you ignore what you know. You are meant to move forward with it. To let it guide how you respond, how you choose, how you position yourself in what comes next. Because what comes next will test this decision. Not in an obvious way, but in subtle moments. Moments where you will be given the opportunity to respond the way you used to or the way you now understand you should. Moments where the familiar will feel easier, but the aligned choice will feel more accurate. Moments where you will have to decide, quickly and quietly, which direction you are going to take. And those moments will define everything. Because alignment is not proven in understanding. It is proven in action. And the choices you make when no one else is guiding you. And the decisions you make when it would be easier to do what you have always done. In the moments where you trust yourself enough to act on what you already know. That is what this comes down to. Trust. Not trust in everything around you, but trust in your own awareness. Trust in your ability to recognize what is aligned and what is not. Trust in your ability to choose correctly without needing constant confirmation. Because you have already been given what you need. You have already seen what you needed to see. You have already felt what you needed to feel. Now, it is time to act on it. Not with hesitation, not with doubt, but with clarity. Because clarity without action changes nothing. But clarity with action changes everything. And that is the choice in front of you tonight. Type "I choose alignment" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 1111 is now activated around your decisions. This is where everything comes together. Not as a conclusion, but as a confirmation. Because what you have heard, what you have felt, what has been building within you through every moment of this message was not meant to stay as awareness alone. It was meant to lead you here, to this final point of activation, where understanding becomes alignment, and alignment becomes protection. Because now, you are no longer unaware. You are no longer uncertain. You are no longer disconnected from what has been unfolding around you. You see it. You feel it. You understand it. And that means something important has shifted. But with that shift comes responsibility. Because once truth is recognized, it cannot be ignored without consequence. Not as punishment, but as misalignment. Because when you know what is right for you, and still choose what is familiar instead, you create internal conflict. You create resistance within yourself. And over time, that resistance weakens your clarity, dulls your awareness, and slowly pulls you back into patterns you were already being guided out of. That is the final warning. Not about something external approaching, but about what happens if you ignore what you now clearly understand. Because the greatest loss is not what happens around you. It is what happens within you when you stop listening to yourself. When you override your awareness. When you silence your clarity in favor of comfort. That is where misalignment begins. And once it begins, everything else follows. But that is not where you are going. Because you did not come this far in awareness just to return to confusion. You did not recognize these patterns just to repeat them. You did not reach this level of clarity just to ignore it when it matters most. You are here because you are ready to move differently, to choose differently, to align with what you now know instead of what you once accepted. And that alignment creates something powerful. It creates protection. Not the kind that removes every challenge, but the kind that keeps you from stepping into situations that are not meant for you. The kind that allows you to see clearly before something becomes complicated. The kind that keeps you steady when everything around you is shifting. That is what is being activated right now. Not something external being given to you, but something internal being strengthened within you. Your awareness, your clarity, your ability to move with intention instead of reaction. And once that is activated, everything changes. Not instantly, but consistently. Because you begin to move differently. You begin to choose differently. You begin to recognize sooner, respond smarter, and step away faster from what no longer aligns. That is how your path shifts. That is how your outcomes change. That is how you move forward without repeating what you have already outgrown. And now, this moment becomes more than just something you listen to. It becomes something you carry, something you act on, something that shapes how you move from this point forward. Because what you do next matters. Not in a dramatic way, but in a consistent way. In the small decisions, in the quiet moments, in the choices no one else sees but you feel deeply. That is where alignment is proven. That is where your awareness becomes your protection. That is where everything you have just understood becomes real. So do not leave this moment unchanged. Do not walk away and return to automatic movement. Stay aware. Stay intentional. Stay aligned with what you now know. Because you are not the same as you were before you heard this. And you should not move the same way either. This is your activation. This is your confirmation. This is your moment to step fully into clarity and let it guide everything that comes next. Type "I walk in full alignment" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 9999 is now activated around your life. As this final activation settles into your spirit, understand this truth. Every time this message reaches someone at the exact moment they need it, a life shifts, a path realigns, and darkness loses its hold. When you give through super thanks or the PayPal link in the description or QR code on your screen, you are not supporting a channel. You are releasing light into places where confusion still lingers. The word declares, "Give, and it shall be given unto you." And this is not theory. This is a living exchange unfolding right now. I step forward in this moment knowing my action can help carry this message to someone who is still searching for clarity. Your giving becomes a seed, and that seed becomes a harvest in both your life and theirs. As you release it, may doors open for you, may your path stay protected, and may your alignment multiply in ways you cannot yet see. Act now, because this moment is not just heard, it is meant to be responded to.